Shabbat Shalom, everybody, and good Shabbos, dear colleagues. Let's thank God for the gift of learning Torah together.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. V'ha'arevna Adonai Eloheinu et divrei Toratcha b'finu u'b'fi amcha b'Yisrael. V'niyeh anachnu v'tzeitzaenu v'tzeitzaei amcha b'Yisrael. Kulanu yodei shemecha v'lomdei Toratcha lishma. Baruch atah Adonai melamed Torah l'yamo Yisrael. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim, v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu haTorah.
So Shabbat Shalom, guys, and Shabbat Shalom. So, there's Torah lishma, Torah that you just study for the sake of Torah. It doesn't necessarily have any particular application to the world. And then there is where Torah meets the streets. Where Torah meets the streets in all of its nuance and messiness and complexity. And that's what we're going to be doing today. We're going to be thinking about the vexatious issue, complicated issue, and a pervasive issue in America, in the world, of what do we do with statues that offend contemporary sensibilities. You're in a town park, there's beautiful tulips, and then there's a statue of a Confederate general, or of a slave holder, or of somebody whose moral views are literally repulsive to you, anathema to you. You hate them. You feel that your entire life is the opposite of those views. And you want to take a nice Father's Day stroll and look at the tulips, and there is a general whose entire life, or Jefferson Davis, whose entire life, it's about owning slaves. And as you all know, and I sent this in the attachment, you'll see both pictures of statues in city after city after city that are toppled by protesters. Columbus in North End of Boston was beheaded by protesters. That's the first picture. And dragged down, toppled, destroyed, or defaced. Winston Churchill was a racist, spray painted in black spray paint. So what I want to do today is take a look at two lenses from the Torah that can help us think about this complicated issue. We've been studying prophets, so we have the ultimate prophet, which is Moses, in his final speech in Deuteronomy, which we're also separately studying with Micha Goodman on Tuesday nights. And we'll be bringing that lens to this, two different lenses from Moses. But before I do that, I just wanted to invite my colleagues. I want to take your moral temperature on this issue. If you could we'll get to the text in a minute, but what's your basic posture on eliminating statues or destroying statues or beheading statues that are offensive to contemporary sensibilities? What's your basic posture and why? We'll just go around real quick in less than a minute, your basic posture and why, and then we'll take a look at these lenses. Elisa.
I am totally opposed to all of these statues. I believe they should all be taken down. And furthermore, you say the paradigm of offensive to contemporary sensibilities, but my understanding is that they were offensive to the sensibilities of those that surrounded them when they were put up, largely in the early 1900s, during the era of Jim Crow, and in the 50s and 60s, they were a symbol designed to make people feel lesser and to affirm white superiority and white supremacy.
And so you're in favor of them being taken down. Do you care how they get taken down? I mean, do you have any concerns if a mob of protesters just topples it or beheads Columbus?
No. I kind of like it. It feels like righteous response to injustice.
Okay.
Is that taking temperature? Is that?
No, I'm just taking
temperature.
Taking the moral temperature.
I thought you meant to surface lightly.
Yes. We got 104 degree fever. Dan Nesson.
So I'm the opposite. I don't think they should be taken down. And I have a couple of things that are personal to me. Like, for instance, I just remember that at one point the statues that are in Boston Symphony Hall were offensive to people because of there's some sexual stuff involved. So they were covered up, and then you couldn't hear anything in Symphony Hall. They destroyed the sound, so they had to uncover them. Another story is there's a school in Brookline, the Devotion School. Edward Devotion apparently was a slave owner. This school has been there forever, and now they've decided to change the name. I'm actually against all that. I just think that, and again, I didn't know the history that you talked about yesterday when we met privately, as clergy, but I think that this is actually, it's important to see the history and resolve the history without destruction. Now, if you notice, I've actually been very, over the past 3 weeks, I've been saying that I think that things don't change without violent movement. In this case, I'm against that.
Okay. Elias.
So I'm sorry if I'm stealing your speech, because I know you may go in that direction. In Judaism, we don't believe in statues. Am I right, Michelle? We don't believe in statues. We are going to see it later here. Thank you, Wes, for that. That's one position. Second, it's so interesting. I mean, I have to tend to agree with Alisa. We shouldn't have statues at all, putting aside the Jewish, traditions. And especially, we are going to touch more on this idea of seeing things that happened 200, 300 years ago, 100 years ago with the pair of eyes of 2020.
Right.
And what does it mean?
Yeah,
but definitely it shouldn't be statues. Statues should be in a museum.
Now, just one thing, and to not pushing back, but just to clarify, nobody asked the Jewish people, hey, do you want statues? So nobody consulted us, didn't ask, we didn't say, please put up some statues of Confederate soldiers. So we inherited a world with statues, and now my question is, given that we inherited a world with statues, what do you think we should do about it?
But we didn't inherit that world. Many of us actually were responsible for building them in the 50s and 60s. Like, that feels false to say that we inherited them. We didn't. We actually put them up.
We inherited. The people who are born today, who are living now, we didn't put them up in the early 1900s. So they're here, and the question now is what we do. You didn't put them down. You're taking them down. Michelle?
So I think there are certain moments that call for the Jewish people to look beyond our own myopic sort of, this is the wisdom for the Jewish people, and think about what the Jewish people have to offer the world. And in this moment, we have a profound truth that we can offer, which is that statues are just really problematic. They're problematic for so many ways, and we've understood that from the very beginning. We're going to study some of those texts about the problematic nature of statues, but we also understand something really profound about human nature, which is our greatest heroes are people who are really complicated and challenging, and we read about them, we study about them, and we have wrestling matches with them throughout every era. And to put up a statue and glorify them is something our tradition says we don't do. And in fact, Moses, who we're about to study in a moment,
Right.
is the first one who says, like, look, I don't know that it's not me. It's not me you're worshiping. It is God, right? The ideas are what matter, not
Right.
the people who embody them. And you're right, we didn't put up
Right.
these statues. But at this moment,
Right.
we as Jews can stand and say there's actually wisdom to be found in understanding that statues are not helpful
Right.
outside of a context where you can have
Right.
a conversation.
So, Michelle, I get all that you're saying and Elias is saying, and here the halachic distinction between lechatchila and b'diavad is helpful. Lechatchila is what would you do prospectively?
Yeah.
So I hear that based on that, what would we do prospectively? Would we build a statue if we were asked? We say definitely not. We like the Moses move. We like the anava, the humility. No, Moses doesn't even have a burial place. Just read his words, right? We're all human and we're all complex and nobody could withstand that scrutiny. Let's just talk about legacy and words and ideas. That's what we would do lechatchila, prospectively. But now b'diavad, we live in a world with statues. So my question to you again is, Is what you're saying, take them all down?
No,
Take all statues down?
So I happen to agree with Elias's move, which is that many of these statues may belong in museums. I don't believe in uprooting our history or destroying our history. I believe in being in dialogue with our history.
Okay.
And that means you put them into a context where you can have a conversation. So that's me as a Jew, right?
Okay.
I'll talk to you about me as an American if you give me the opportunity
Can I
later.
bring up
Okay,
something short?
just real quick, because we're going to get to
Very
the text.
quick.
Very quick.
4 years ago, we did a temple trip and Cantos Assembly trip to Spain.
Yes.
We were in the city of Cordoba, and we are walking on the streets, and we see a statue of Maimonides. Maimonides, who doesn't like Maimonides? He's wonderful. My first reaction and the whole group reaction is, let's take a picture with Maimonides statue. That's unbelievable. Finally, one Jew has a statue. So I have to admit that I was very happy to see that.
Well, thank you for that, Elias. Michelle Robinson, are you against Maimonides statue?
So it's really interesting because I was reading an article in preparation for this about Israel and statues. And particularly there is actually a statue of Rabin. There's a statue, there's a little bust of some other leaders at the airport. So there are a few places in Israel where they hold by statues. But there are actually a number of other places where they've specifically chosen not to have that statues, partially for those reasons. There have been leaders throughout Jewish history who, if you had put up a statue of them at the time, right, everybody would have wanted to take a picture with them.
Right.
And then the gloss of history came on, the complexities of their lives, and they fell out of favor. And there's something about lacking that complexity in our conversation that makes it hard to know what the right move is, right? In terms of, I know you're gonna.
Okay.
All right.
So good.
We can move on.
So here, yeah.
But
So my thought is, I'm gravely concerned about something that nobody really explicitly mentioned. I'm extremely concerned about mob rule and mob unrest, about street anger, because and lack of due process and lack of civility. I'm a big believer in reasoned discourse. I'm a big believer in legal process. Don't forget that the left does not have a monopoly on righteous anger. The right is really good at righteous anger, and they bring arms and rifles. I commend everybody to Nicholas Kristof's article about why the small town in Oregon that's 250 miles from Portland and 400 miles from the Bay Area had a whole right-wing militia armed to the hilt thing because on Facebook they were told that people from Antifa are coming, and so they were there armed to the hilt. I'm super worried about our country coming apart at the seams. I'm super worried about violence. We're the most armed country in the world. The left has arms, the right has arms. People love arms more than their own kids. And I'm really worried about, I'm worried about people, and also everyone's in their own echo chamber, so they're righteously indignant. Like, they're jumping up and down, my truth, my truth, my truth. And they have arms, and they have anger, and they have violence, and they have people, and they have they have this chamber where everybody thinks like them. And the only thing is, there's a whole other group that feels just the opposite. And so I'm I'm super worried about, on the merits, of course, I despise second to none in despising the Confederacy, obviously. Second to none in despising slaveholders, obviously. But how the society deals with it is all important, and I'm gravely concerned about decapitating Columbus. Because, when you decapitate Columbus, it's not going to be too long until you decapitate that Jew, the Rambam. Right? And if you create a world where you can decapitate Columbus, you create a world where you can decapitate Rambam, and then not only do you decapitate Rambam, you decapitate current Jews who like the Rambam. So I'm super worried about it. So let's go.
Wait, can I pull out the two strings, though? Because I think I actually...
Michelle, can I just finish?
Yeah.
Keep going. Okay, so we're going to the first lens, which is an address in the Torah for the destruction of statues. This is the address. So we're on page 8, okay? And this is Deuteronomy 7. And the context here is Moses telling the Israelites that when they get to Canaan, there are going to be statues of Canaanite gods, and your move is to destroy, topple, eliminate statues of Canaanite gods. So here we go. Chapter 7. When the Lord your God, page 8, when the Lord your God brings you to the land that you are about to enter and possess, and he dislodges many nations before you, the Hittites, Girgashites, Amorites, Canaanites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites, 7 nations much larger than you, and the Lord your God delivers them to you and you defeat them, you must doom them to destruction, grant them no terms, and give them no quarter. You shall not intermarry with them. Do not give your daughters to their sons or take their daughters for your sons, for they will turn your children away from me to worship other gods, and the Lord's anger will blaze forth against you, and he will promptly wipe you out. Instead, this is what you shall do to them. You shall tear down their altars, smash their pillars, cut down their sacred posts, and consign their images to the fire. For you are a people consecrated to the Lord your God. Of all the peoples on earth, the Lord your God chose you to be his treasured people. So first, I just want to evaluate this in its own context, and then we'll talk about this as a lens for our statue elimination issue today. Elisa, just looking at the pshat of this, what's your reaction to the violence in this passage?
I find it a very interesting thing. On the one hand, I believe Jewish tradition wants us to believe that idol worship is as evil as the idol worship of Confederacy that we see in our country, and that the images and the pillars and the altars and the sacred spaces are physically dangerous. And if I can adopt that, then I see that there's a ritual significance to tearing these down in such a violent way, to indicate the very danger, the way that they potentially could threaten Jewish life. Now, as a modern person reading this, I don't share that same fear about those idols, but maybe I just don't have the perspective because I wasn't alive then to see what those represented. But clearly the voice of the Torah is that that's very dangerous, and we need a ritual to enact destruction.
And are you at all concerned about this? I mean, do you think that the Torah here role models good values for us? Well, we're going to get to the statue in a minute, but our contemporary statues in a minute. But do you think this is one of the better days of the Torah, or do you think this is the Torah on its worst day?
So I think we need more information here. I mean, I don't believe in. So I don't believe in colonialism. I don't believe in going in and smashing down other people's gods or idols or sacred sanctuaries. Like, that doesn't feel right to me. And what I know is that the Torah voice is like, these endanger your identity, these endanger you. I don't know what about it felt that dangerous. So on like, if I don't know anything about these communities and I'm just seeing them as oppressors that are going in and conquering civilizations and destroying their culture, that feels incredibly wrong. If I see that culture as harmful to humanity, then I might feel differently, and it all depends on what's going on there.
Okay, so I just want to say one thing, and then I want to invite Michelle, Elias, and Dan to comment. Just for more information. So Deuteronomy, according to Bible scholars, as I was taught at the seminary, Deuteronomy is is the first book in what's called the Deuteronomic history. So that's Deuteronomy, then the book of Judges, book of Joshua, Sefer Yoshua, Sefer Shoftim, the book of Judges, and then Samuel 1 and 2, and Kings 1 and 2, Shmuel, Aleph and Beit, Melachim, Aleph and Beit. So from Deuteronomy through all those other books are considered the Deuteronomic history. And one of the key features of the Deuteronomic history is the idea of holy war, and that the Israelites are holy warriors. God is on their side. They are possessed of the truth, capital T, and the Canaanites are the enemy with no validity, and you're on a holy war. God is on your side to destroy the Canaanites. Okay. And I just want to bring this up because I do feel that the protesters who destroy statues also feel like they are on a holy war. Like they possess the truth, capital T. These Israelites possess the truth, capital T. They're holy warriors in a holy war. And angry mobs, left and right, are also in their own view as holy warriors. you know, and et cetera. So, Michelle, Elias, Dan, any comments on this lens?
Yeah,
I
so-
don't like it at all.
You don't like it, why not?
Because this would have been the same thing as if in 67 Israel recaptures Jerusalem, and then the first thing that they do, and they go and destroy every single mosque, or they level down all the Christian sites in Jerusalem.
Okay, so then...
Pure hatred, pure intolerance, and
so
no
how do you...
sense of history.
Okay, so thank you. So how do you square that with your opening moral intuition? You don't like statues, we should take them down.
Statues it's a good question, but statues is kind of different.
Say more.
You are idolizing people, you know? So for example, the comparison I'm bringing up is, you know, you destroy the mosque, that's a sacred place for Muslims to pray. I don't agree with leveling it down, even if Israel or any Jewish state has, you know, government over. The statue refers more to people that could be controversial. And
Okay.
this is too far.
You're
Michelle?
confusing principle and process. So there are two levels here, Wes. There's the principle, right? Does this piece of Torah that we should be tearing down, that there should not be statues, idols, representations, that's one level. The second level is, okay, so what should we do with them, right? And you're very hot on mobs, right? Fairly, right? Yesterday, I was speaking with my brother-in-law who lives in Albany, and the government in New York has just determined that they're going to take down in Albany the statue of Philip Schuyler. They did that, on the one hand. They didn't
From
just
Hamilton?
wake up. From Hamilton.
From Hamilton.
Right? From Hamilton.
From Schuyler's daughters?
Yes.
Oh my God, the
So, right?
Schuyler sisters?
So they did that, right, because of this moment and because of the pressure of this moment, which helped them realize that this statue is hurting people, right? But they didn't do it with a mob. They did it with process. They did it with a sense of governance. They did it, and by the way, it's going to go in a museum where they can have a conversation about that. So I think there are really two pieces of this conversation, and we should be transparent about that. There's the general principle, and then there's the how.
Thank you. Super helpful. So I couldn't agree more. And it was if the governor and the state legislature say we're going to take down statue X because it's offensive, although not if it's in Hamilton, the Schuyler sisters.
But they're not going to do that on their own necessarily.
Right, but they're going to. If there's a process, then that feels like society working. That feels like society working. That feels like an orderly process of ideas, conversation, marketplace of ideas, etc. That I'm very comfortable with. Right. What I'm not comfortable with is people taking this into their own hands, etc.
May I ask a question, Wes?
Yeah.
Very quickly. You brought it up in the teaser of the Talmud class.
Yes.
You are a Jew living in Berlin.
Yes.
Right? And you are walking down the streets and there is a statue of Hitler there. And it has been, supposedly, and it has been there for 70 years. All right? And you know that there are legislators and different people in the government going through the proper channels to taking it down, and nobody's paying attention to that. The answer is no. And you have a hatred for Hitler, and it represents what he did to the Jewish people. What would you do?
Yeah, so I could tell you what I would not do. I would not deface it or destroy it. I would find ways to protest. I would find ways to mobilize political energy. But I think smashing, tearing down, consigning to the fire based on my holy war is just not my jam.
Wes,
It's just not my jam.
I just have one other question. I want to go back to something which is, I just think, a really interesting contradiction in that one of the things we keep talking about is due process to bring these statues down.
Right.
But most all of these statues were not put up with due process. And so one question I have for you is, how do we think about statues that were put up without the will of the democracy, without the will of the people, without black people's even having the say in whether they would go up? and continue to be a symbol of explicit white supremacy and hatred, why do we then need due process to take them down when they did not have due process to go up?
Well, because when we live in a very diverse and charged and fraught time, and everything now is a provocation to somebody else. Everything is a trigger to somebody else, okay? And when a group of protesters takes down this statue because it violates their norms and their sense of decency, that will create a counter move of an equally passionate group, armed, who are going to fight that, put up another, et cetera.
Can I ask one more question on that?
So
because
I just want to, yes, and then
just
I want to
one
talk
more
about
thing, which
another
is
lens. Yes.
Dylan Roof, who went in and shot 9 parishioners at the Emmanuel AME Church.
Yes.
The Unite the Right rally, all were using Confederate symbols in order to justify their hatred. And they weren't using this statues coming down. They were using actually the symbols that exist in our world.
Right.
So those are actually symbols of terrorism.
Aliza, I'm not a fan of Confederate symbols. I'm opposed to Confederate symbols. I'm just also opposed to war in our streets, and I'm also super concerned about the election coming up in November, super concerned about war in our streets, and I would love to create a world where angry groups of people don't resolve contentious issues on the streets. I don't think that's good for society. So, Dan, and then I want to get to the next one. Yes.
So I was thinking about this this text from Deuteronomy. So I was thinking about two things. One of the things is that this sounds like mob rule. Is this going to be when the Israelites come into Canaan? How are they going to take these things down?
Right.
It seems like there's not going to be a due process of any kind. Just total destruction. And the other thing is, it seems to me that this also creates, and I think Elias pointed to this, the idea that that this is a systemic racism. Now, the Jewish people are coming into the land of Canaan and destroying everything. Because just saying that these people are going to be inferior to us, that there's a racism that's being created right away. So when you ask, is this Torah in its worst day or its best day? I think it's one of the worst days.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. It's Torah on its worst day, and to me, the resonance of this kind of Torah on its worst day is a cautionary note: beware of your own holy wars.
What's so interesting is,
beware of being a holy warrior.
Yeah, what's so interesting is that we have it not only in our Jewish history, we actually have it in our American history. Now, I don't know if there's somebody, Brian, monitoring the camera, but if you look at this photo, this is actually a representation of on July 9th, 1776, when there was a band, a mob, that George Washington's troops were a part of on the Bowling Green in a park near Manhattan, where they took down, by force, a statue of King George, because King George represented everything that they were against. They took it down without any process. They took it down in a in a moment of heat.
Right.
And then they actually wound up they kept records for 42,088 bullets were then made for the war that America then embarked upon. So both principles, the reason I bring this up is that we have a history of tearing down statues as Americans that offend us, that stand against our principles.
Yeah.
And this very specifically did have the consequences that you said. There is a reaction to that. It changes the world sometimes when you tear down statues.
Right. And if you're going to mention George Washington, then just one last thing about it, which was at the end of the Revolutionary War, and his army was hungry, impoverished, hadn't been paid, hadn't been fed, had given 8 years under the most miserable conditions. And now, and they were owed a lot of money, and the country didn't have money, and the army said, "Let's march to Washington. We are the army, and we'll go to the Congress and we'll demand our due." And George Washington said, "Never. We don't do that. We're a nation of laws. disband. The army has served its purpose. You're not going to be a mob, a righteous, angry mob, and go back home to your farms and to your families. And I think that kind of restraint and humility is quite lovely. So let's look at the second.
Must be nice.
Yeah.
Must be nice.
So I want to take, okay, so here's the second.
Side.
So one lens from Deuteronomy is holy war, destroy the pillars that are offensive to you. Here's the second move, and this is what I really like, and I just think Moses is so brilliant. So our portion this morning, Shalach Lecha, narrates the sin of the spies. You know, the famous story of 10 spies who were faithless, and 2, Yehoshua and Caleb, who had faith. And in Shalach Lecha, our portion this morning, we don't get rid of the statues. We know exactly the names of those 10 tribes. We know their name. We know their father's name. We know their tribe. We know we know them by name. Nobody effaced them because they made a disastrous mistake, right? A disastrous mistake. What they did would have consequences. I mean, the entire generation would die off in the wilderness. This whole generation that had left Egypt could never get to the promised land because of these 10 bad spies, and we know their names. And in Deuteronomy, 38 years later, Moses does not efface the story. What he tries to do is learn from the story. So we don't have time to go through it all, but if you're wondering back home, is there a different model? Just, I'm going to characterize, read pages 10 through 12, which is Moses 38 years after the events of our reading this morning. What he does is he says, this is a really challenged story. This is a really challenged history. I'm not going to efface it. I'm going to surface it. I want you to learn from it. And then if you look, and that is such a trope for Moses, just take a look at page 14. Throughout Deuteronomy, what Moses does is every one of their worst moments, he resurfaces, he doesn't erase, and he says, let's learn from it. So on page 14, he talks about the sin, 14 and 15, the sin of the golden calf. Look at what you do with the sin of the golden calf. He doesn't erase, he surfaces. And then look at verse 22. In one verse, he brings up 3 hot spots of their sins. You can see in the commentary on the bottom of page 16, the commentary to 22, each one of those places, Tabera, Masa, Kibrot HaTa'ava, represented a huge moral failing of the Israelites. And then he concludes with, again, talking about the sin of the spies. And so his move is, don't efface history. Don't erase history. Learn from history. And I'm super concerned about, Jefferson Davis is appalling. Robert E. Lee is appalling. Do we serve future generations if they don't know about them? I mean, it's just like I was listening to NPR all day yesterday, and person after person had never heard of Juneteenth. Person after person had never heard of Juneteenth. They didn't know it. They'd never heard of the Tulsa Massacre. They didn't know it, right? History was not surfaced. And the entire upshot of yesterday was how do we not let that happen? How do we teach the Tulsa Massacre? How do we teach Juneteenth? How do we teach what it was like for enslaved peoples during the war and after the war? And because so many well-meaning Americans, white Americans in particular, had no idea. And I'm really worried that when you take down all these statues, you're going to efface history and erase history, the anti-Moses move, and future generations just won't know from it. So thoughts about erasing history and concerns about that, and then we'll talk about Moses' alternative move. Elias and then Michelle.
Sorry, Michelle.
No, don't be.
I'm thinking about we are talking about a topic that the beheading of the statues and this idea of turning them down, that here in America, and correct me if I'm wrong, it started with the killing of George Floyd. It's not that it started because the majority in this country, people being white, got together and said, let's revision history and let's think about the statues and about how offensive this could be to black people. And it didn't come like that. It wasn't like we are now all of a sudden rethinking about history and being so good that we need to do something for them. It came because of the killing of George Floyd.
Yes.
All right? So it's this thing that we talk about turning them down. And I mean, the process is obviously, the process is the thing that we need to do, going through the proper channels and putting all the statues in the museum. But, let's think about that.
Michelle?
So I noticed that here in this reading, it's on Mount Ebal. There's a place, there's a space where you have this conversation. And you actually are obligated to go there from time to time to have it, but you're not there every day confronting it, and when you're going to the grocery store, when you're on your way to, take your children to daycare.
We're not on the opposite sides here.
Yeah,
I agree with you.
Right. So,
in other words, it doesn't sound like you're in favor of mobs tearing down statues. It sounds like
correct.
You're in favor of society thoughtfully thinking about, Jefferson Davis is appalling. How do we take this piece of history, and what's the context, a thoughtful context? What's a museum? We should have a museum of the antebellum South.
Yeah,
and we should come up with that museum so that future generations know about it, know about the costs and consequences in human lives of the enslaved peoples, and let's be thoughtful about it. Right. And that sounds like that's what you're saying.
Yeah. Right? That doesn't. I'm going to go back to Dan's point. Right? That doesn't always happen, and Elias's point just now. Right. Doesn't always happen in a society on its own in a calm way. Right. Sometimes it takes the foment in order to help us to do the soul searching that is required so that now we can actually get all on the same page and start that process of making the move of those statues out of the public square and into places where they can be in thoughtful conversation.
So, thank you. I've been, the main conversation, Sam, our 29-year-old, has been living with us during the pandemic, and the main conversation that we've had with him, including all day yesterday on Juneteenth, was how violence and unruly protest is an indispensable ingredient in social change. And that, he took a lot of AFAM classes when he was in college. And the main point of AFAM was you need Martin Luther King, nonviolence, and you need Malcolm X, violence. And without the violence, then the nonviolence doesn't ever have an impact. You need both. And he talks about, as I mentioned last week, AIDS activism, and that when they just talked, nothing got done. When they started bringing corpses and trying to throw the corpses of people who died from AIDS over the White House lawn, that got people's attention. So I do hear that, but I do think that it's good for society to do a corrective and say, wait a minute, enough with the violence. Let's put Jefferson Davis in a museum. I'm cool with that. I don't love Jefferson Davis. I just don't love violence, and I love thoughtful, and I love orderly, and so maybe we've had enough of that good violence so that we can start doing peaceful process. Aliza.
So I find the argument around erasing history to be highly problematic, in large part because it's very selective history. Like if this was really a reasonable representation of our history, we'd expect to see a lot of monuments here from the Civil War, from the side that actually won. And we'd expect to see monuments that extol the virtues of our proudest moments. And what we actually see are so many monuments that idolize our greatest failures. And what we see beyond those monuments is in their shadows we see people living out those values, living out the values that Black people do not deserve to have equal rights and equal access to resources and to opportunity. We see people living out the values that Black people should be shot down in daylight. And so what I see is our fear of erasing history enables that vision, enables people to see that we value Confederate values, because if we didn't value, we would tear down those structures. We value Confederate values because we're not in a rush to get rid of them. We want to have process. We want to be thoughtful about it. We value. There's a part of us that's unwilling to give up on those values, and so I think that while we're afraid of erasing history, we're actually writing the future, and the future that we're writing is a really problematic future.
So you're super persuasive. Here's my question to you. Where does it end? So that same logic
Yep.
would permit us to say, let's take down the Jefferson Memorial.
Yep.
Not only was Jefferson, I'm channeling that voice.
Yep.
Not only was he a racist, he was a rapist. He was a racist and a rapist because, Sally Hemings was not consensual. That was inherently coercive. So he raped Sally Hemings. He was a total hypocrite writing those words for white men.
Yep.
And he owned slaves. It nauseates me seeing the Jefferson Memorial. Where does it end?
So I think it is totally right for those memorials to be torn down. I think it is totally right for us.
You would tear down the Jefferson Memorial?
Yeah. I would say let's have a reckoning with what if an alien comes from outer space and looks at the United States of America and all they get to see are the public monuments and public buildings as expressions of our values. Those values should be aligned with who we want to be.
But Elisa Berger, I just love your passion and idealism, and it's so interesting because we're obviously different generations, and so different generations have different lenses. But can you make any allowance for complexity? And for in other words, didn't Jefferson do anything good that was worthy of admiration? Is it possible to keep the Jefferson Memorial, to admire that which he did, which was admirable, and to excoriate that which he did, which should be critiqued, today? And that rape is bad, and what he did with Sally Hemings is bad, and owning slaves is bad, and also he did a lot of good. So would you really, what about complexity?
So I think that there's a place for complexity and there's a place for black and white. And I think that while we're fighting so hard against the tides of racism and injustice in our country, there's not space for complexity. We have to have a ritual enactment of tearing down the structures of supremacy that exist. And there might be a time where that can exist, but our world it's not now.
So you would take down the Jefferson Memorial and you would take down the Washington Monument. Would you rename Washington? He owned slaves.
I think it's a serious conversation. I think it's a worthwhile conversation. I was trying to think about, would I feel good about living on Eichmann Avenue or Hitler Street? No, and I would feel like those should be renamed.
But time out.
But if you do
Hitler,
that, Elisa, you
hold on.
have to take down also, you have to revise all the textbooks that the kids learn at school.
That's a whole other, textbooks should be revised.
Elisa, can I just go with that for a second?
Yes.
Hitler Avenue, Eichmann Avenue, they were just evil.
Yeah.
100% evil.
Totally.
Washington was not 100% evil. Washington was 100% a hero. Without Washington, there is no United States of America. I commend you to watch the Washington series that was done by the History Channel this year. Unbelievable. And he was truly a hero. Without Washington, we have no country. We're not here. And also, he owned slaves, and also he was problematic, and also he was human. So are you really comfortable analogizing Washington to Hitler?
Washington declared extermination of the Iroquois in 1779. Washington believed in exterminating the native peoples in this country. Yes, he was genocidal.
Okay, last question. As long as we're on, here's my concern we're real, so here's my last question for you, my dear friend. So, not only is there a Jefferson Memorial that you're suggesting might be revisited, and a Washington Monument, but take Dr. King. Everybody loves Dr. King. But as long as we're being honest and, no holds barred, he was a serial adulterer. Mm-hmm. Okay? So would you be comfortable, you had shared with me that you're comfortable that Churchill, his thing was defaced with Churchill was a racist. Would you be comfortable with somebody defacing Dr. King's monument? Dr. King was a serial adulterer. Dr. King, was misogynistic. Would you be comfortable with that? Or should we take it down because we really don't like adultery, we really don't like serial adultery, we're very much against misogyny. He was some version of all of that, so should we take him down too? So
Churchill was a racist. He blatantly said that he was willing to drop poisonous gas on Palestinians, that he considered them to be eating camel dung. He took a blind eye to the famine that existed in Bengal while he was fighting. He said that Indians bred like rabbits. He was a racist. That's not false.
And Dr. King was an adulterer.
Totally. So that's why I think that statues belong in museums. That's why I think that statues are the wrong thing, that you want to have attention drawn to history, thoughtful, nuanced conversations, but it doesn't need to be lambasted in public squares. There's a place for history and there's a place for thoughtful conversation, and statues just don't create that.
And so you would also, what would you do with Dr. King's statue?
So I think that there's a reasonable conversation to be had around, like, are we against all statues? I would say, like, I don't think that that's the right move. If statues exist and somebody writes that on Dr. King's statue, it's true. Like, that is true. And so I'm not sure, like, we're so, truth is, I think, important. Saying Winston Churchill was good in these ways and was also a racist is important. It's important for that statue. And I think, you know, when you showed me that image yesterday, I was like, winner, because that's true. Like, he was a hero in this way, and he was a racist, and we should see that. And when we look at a statue, we should see that.
And that's the power of the writing and the power of the books in
Right.
which we learn our history.
Right.
When you look to all our heroes, King David, you know, that is a model of everything that we would revile in so many ways in the modern world. And he is also one of our greatest heroes, and the books give us the space to wrestle with that and
Right.
to tackle that. And so perhaps the statue movement at this time is helping America come to terms with something that Jewish tradition has been trying to teach us for a long time,
Books
which
are
is
better
that
than statues.
books work better than statues.
Well, we can all agree on that. Books are better than statues. My only little footnote is yes, but they're statues also in the world. But by all means, read books, don't build statues. We all five of us unanimously support the reading of books. Just know that there are also some problematic statues. Dan, last word.
The conversation about statues is really interesting. There's something in our human sociology that says that we have to put up statues. We've been doing this for 7,000 years, right? So the question is then what the reflection of our values, of course, are in those statues. But the idea that we put them up, I think, is really interesting, and that they're not put in museums. You know, they are, but they're not. They're in public places of gathering. And so there's something very, very viscerally human about doing that. And when we put them up and take them down, and put them up and take them down, that's also part of our human history. So I think that brings another layer to the whole conversation.
Well, guys, thank you for a thoughtful conversation. There's no particular end to it, but I do agree, of course, with everyone's basic moral intuition, which is that the greatest Jew, Moses, had no statue, and that's really wise. And now, from Moses' words, may we learn how to make do with the mess that is a world that does also have statues. Elias, do you have a song?
Yes,
take the song
it's a little late, so we are going to do just the refrain and one stanza, my colleagues. Beautiful song, Eliyahu Navi, written by Max Chalken, young composer from actually this area, who for many years taught at the Rashi School. And at one point, you know, this idea of having Eliyahu Navi that will come and change the world. And the lyric says, "We are waiting for a time to come when injustice shall be gone, pain and violence will be no more, done with hatred, done with war. And all the people in the land will lend their voices, lend their hand. The day starts with you and me and Eliyahu Navi." So I think it's a nice way of concluding.
Eliyahu Hanavi, Eliyahu HaTishbi, Eliyahu Hanavi, Eliyahu HaGiladi, Bimera Liyameinu, Yavo Eleinu, Im Mashiach ben David, Im Mashiach ben David. We are waiting for the time to come when injustice shall be gone. Pain and violence will be no more. Done with hatred, done with war. And all the people in the land will lend their voices, lend their hand. That day starts with you and me. And Eliyahu Hanavi, Eliyahu Hanavi, Eliyahu HaTishbi, Eliyahu Hanavi, Eliyahu HaGiladi, Bimera Liyameinu, Yavo Eleinu, Im Mashiach ben David, Im Mashiach ben David.
Thank you. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom, everybody.
Oh. Not done yet. I got some spiritual homework for you. For those of you who have not yet signed up for Hartman's virtual learning over the summer, after Shabbos, please go on the Hartman website and sign up. We have 169 members from the temple who are doing it. All 5 of us are doing it. 169 members are doing it. And here's the thing you need to know. You don't have to be, it's not a month solid. It's just if you sign up, there's a lot of amazing classes, offerings, the best teachers of Torah in the world. And there's going to be a whole selection. You'll see it on there, and you'll do what you can do. If you can't do it, all the classes, great. They anticipate that nobody can do all the classes, but you'll be able to sign up for what you can do, and what you can do will lift you up. So after Shabbos, go to the Hartman website and sign up. We'd love to have all of us learning Torah together. Shabbat shalom.